The United Conservative Party is new on the scene in Alberta politics, and its first leader will be familiar to many. Jason Kenney won the job last weekend, and we have some familiar faces with us tonight to talk about it. Andrew is in Toronto, Althea in Toronto as well, and Shachi Curl is joining us from Vancouver. Hello to all three of you.
Hello.
Hi, Heather.
In just a matter of months, if you haven't been keeping close track, Jason Kenney left federal politics, won the PC leadership in Alberta, formed a new United Party, and then won its leadership decisively.
Friends, we are one step closer to a government that will stand up and defend our province from the growing attacks against our resources and our economy.
From his victory speech. Now, Andrew, let me start with you, because obviously his election as leader is going to have implications for Rachel Notley, who will face him likely in 2019. But let's look at the national implications for tonight. In terms of that Alberta for Albertan stance we heard expressed there, what is this going to mean for regional and provincial tensions, differences, relations?
Well, the tensions are already there, I guess I would say. Albertans are feeling kind of beaten up, not just by the recent oil price collapse, which they're recovering from, but a sense that the game is stacked against them. There was this implicit or explicit bargain that if we went along with carbon taxes, that there'd be a trade-off in terms of pipelines being built. And a lot of Albertans would say it doesn't look like that's happened when they see the Trans Mountain barely alive, when they see Northern Gateway having been killed, when they see Energy East having been killed. And so there's a sense that, as I say, that this game, this bargain that was supposed to be out there has not been fulfilled. And partly some of them are maybe looking to take that out on Rachel Notley, feeling that she got too close with Justin Trudeau. But more broadly, they're feeling like they need to push back. And that's, so the tension's already there, but it could well lead to increased tensions as a result.
Althea, your thoughts on that, particularly as concerns BC and Quebec, as Andrew mentioned?
Yeah, well, part of Mr. Kenney's offer to Albertans was to wage war against the equalization formula, for example. He said he was going to have a referendum on this formula, and he was going to pressure the federal government to change the formula, although the formula that exists at the moment is the formula that his government, the Stephen Harper government, helped establish. He's also threatened during the campaign to withhold oil and gas to British Columbia if they slowed down the Kinder Morgan process. So already he's signaling he's basically going to be the Brad Wall of the conservative movement across the country, and is going to be Justin Trudeau's conservative opposition, not just a potential Alberta premier, but the voice of right-wingers across the country. That has significant implications for Andrew Scheer as well, the new Conservative leader, who risks being really overshadowed by Jason Kenney, who is very attuned at the media game, and also has a message that is probably more conservative than Andrew Scheer wants his message to be. He still needs to reach out to people in suburbia, for example. And so a message on the environment that might play well in Alberta may not necessarily play well in places where the Conservatives need to win in 2019.
Let's talk about Andrew Scheer and conservatism in a little bit more detail in a second, but you also raised, Althea, equalization. Now, there's an issue the Liberals federally would rather not talk about, likely. So, Shachi, bringing you in, pick up on the points that Althea was making in terms of the challenge that Jason Kenney presents for Justin Trudeau.
Well, he presents a challenge, but in some ways, Justin Trudeau may present a challenge back to Jason Kenney. It's important to remember that the face of Alberta, and in some ways the political values of Alberta, may be shifting. Yes, I am going to fight Ottawa, I'm going to be swinging for Albertans who are disrespected in Confederation is a very resonant message. It's protein on the plate. But let's just look at the census numbers that we saw very recently that show not just migration, but immigration into Alberta. And so what does that mean in terms of political culture and really sort of values around what new Canadians find important? And they may value stability, they may value a better quality of life more than some of these more pointed topics on policy, on the environment, on equalization. Not only that, about half in the province are a little bit worried about where Jason Kenney is going to take the party. They are concerned and expressing concern that a united Conservative Party may actually be too right-wing. And on leadership, when we asked Albertans about this during the leadership campaign, look, he won a decisive mandate from United Conservative Party members. But at the same time, it was Brian Jean who was actually doing a little bit better on favorability among all Albertans.
Andrew, on the new voters, we've seen Jason Kenney expertly cultivate those new voters. Justin Trudeau cultivates those same voters, uses similar strategies. So again, your thoughts on the kind of challenge that Jason Kenney presents to the Liberal leader, the Prime Minister? Yeah,
he's extremely aware of that and was a great success story federally in that regard. Certainly compared to any previous Conservative government, the Harper government was able to reach out to them, squandered some of those gains later in their term, but I think that was an important advance. I do think that defending Alberta's economy, defending its resource base from outsiders plays pretty well, I think, across the board, frankly, in any province, but particularly in Alberta at this time. There's a dilemma here for, as you mentioned, for both Justin Trudeau and Andrew Scheer. The basic problem here is we've got the fundamental terms of federalism are not being observed. If you've got provinces saying you can't transport your resources across our soil unless you pay us Dana Geld or maybe we just block it altogether, that's just fundamentally contrary to the whole, the basis of which why we formed a country. If the reason why Kenney gets some traction in this is because the federal government so far has not been doing its job of pushing this through. Now, that could change, but somebody's got to be able to speak up for the overall national interest, not just the Alberta interest. So that's a challenge for Trudeau. It's also potentially an opportunity for Scheer. I mean, it's true that to some extent he might be overshadowed by Kenney, but he can also play off him. He's got a different constituency to appeal to than just Albertans. But if he can broaden it into a who speaks for Canada type of message, then there's maybe a potential opening for him.
Sachi, just one last thought on that to you before we change issues. And that is, I mean, are you picking up anything? Is there a sense of a brewing showdown over who is going to be the most conservative or the most influential conservative voice?
Well, it's interesting because on one hand, we've already got signs of a showdown between the NDP in Alberta and the NDP nationally over some of these energy issues. Rachel Notley turning to both the leader of the NDP in British Columbia and nationally saying, hey, don't sink me here on the energy file. I would just suggest that both Andrew Scheer and Jason Kenney do well to get on the same page around that because there is a lot of division and a lot of nuance, and no community, whether it be a minority community or a community in the environmental lobby or in the energy lobby, really votes or thinks as a monolith. There's a lot of different shifting things at play.
Okay. Alfie, I'm going to get you to begin the next area. The issue that was dominating the Hill again this week was the finance minister, loopholes, and ethics.
Is the ethics commissioner wrong when she says that there is more than one minister but less than 5? Who are the other ministers that are using the same loophole that the finance minister used?
So there was question period today, and the Conservative leader, Andrew Scheer, asking the question that I'm sure all three of you were asking, many else were asking. At fewer than 5 ministers, Althea, that's all we got from the office of Mary Dawson, the ethics commissioner. No names, no specific numbers. Should there be an obligation to disclose that?
Well, I'm sure we want an obligation to disclose that, but her read of her job is to keep those numbers confidential. Her role is basically to oversee about 2,200 public office holders who have reporting guidelines, to receive their information confidentially, to provide information confidentially. And she argues to investigate only when the media or members of parliament raise issues to her attention. She doesn't proactively investigate. So at issue today was basically the Prime Minister's office, and Bill Morneau said this in question period today, that there are 2 people who were using a loophole that he had used to hold their assets, public securities, indirectly. Mary Dawson decided that she was going to cast the net wider and leave the suggestion that there was as many as 5. Now, there's no rule, as far as I can tell, that suggests that you need to cast the net that wide. I don't know why she didn't just say there were 2 people. I mean, the information is actually publicly available on her website. But she refuses to do so. And on the note of the loophole, may I just add that many observers believe that this loophole was actually created by Mary Dawson herself. She's a lawyer. Basically, she's been doing a job that nobody wants, the ethics commissioner's job, since 2007. And her read of the act is, well, this wasn't explicitly included, therefore it's excluded. But many people, like Democracy Watch, like former observers of conflict of interest legislation around the world, think this loophole was basically created by her.
Okay, I'm going to get Andrew and then Shachi's closing thoughts on this. Andrew, mentioning Mary Dawson, obviously the Liberals are using her to provide pretty good cover on this, in that whatever her bad advice has allowed, that's led to this lack of transparency. Is she the watchdog Canada needs in this position? How much of a level of responsibility does she bear?
I think it's increasingly clear she bears a fair amount. I mean, everybody's been saying, well, we've just been following the advice of the ethics commissioner, and even the Tories say, oh, we don't question the judgment of the ethics commissioner. I question the judgment of the ethics commissioner. I think a lot of people do. She gave Morneau bad advice. He shouldn't have taken it. He should have had enough sense not to take it. But not only in creating, as Althea said, this loophole that doesn't appear anywhere in the law, but also in her proposed remedy of the conflict of interest screen. You know, maybe she's got the power to recommend that, but it shouldn't be taking the place of the obligation, very clear obligation, to recuse and to announce that you've recused, which he didn't do. So, you know, if you're in a position like Morneau, you have to do one or more of three things. You have to either divest or disclose or recuse, and he didn't do any of those, apparently with all the blessing of the ethics commissioner. So I think she's got a lot of questions to answer, as does he.
And many asking, where was the common sense, as you suggest, in all of this? So, Shachi, to you, the final question. Within a government that has promised greater openness, greater accountability, greater transparency, what effect is all of this having on public perception?
You know, ethics is the branch of philosophy that deals with morality and the virtuous and non-virtuous characteristics and actions of people. And this is what it's about. It's about virtue. At the end of the day, the claims here are not that the Trudeau government, that Bill Morneau, that the other minister has done anything necessarily wrong in a quasi-legal sense. It's that this government, its first ministers, are not necessarily meeting the extraordinary test of virtue that Justin Trudeau set for himself and for his cabinet. Of course, the problem for the Conservatives in all of this is that there's a pox on both houses when it comes to failing both the virtue test and the common sense test. We're not that far removed from the days of Brian Mulroney being dragged through the issues around his accepting of cash payments, and we're still fairly close to the days of the Harper PMO's dealings with the Duffy affair. And at the end of it, you know, Canadians are just sitting back and wondering why their parliamentarians can't figure this out and get it straight when they have to get it straight around their own codes of conduct and common sense at work.